Refused a tip from a billionaire?
Ronan Price's voice rang off glass. You think that's noble, mechanic? A few executives snickered. The woman at the head of the steel table didn't smile. Vivian Kessler watched as the maintenance man slid her thick envelope back toward her hand. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. The lounge sat above the factory like a balcony above a storm. Quiet up here, roaring down there. The envelope lay between polished nails and oil-stained fingers, money pretending to be respect. He didn't argue. He didn't bow. I fixed your line, he said, steady. Keep your tip. Ronan leaned forward as if tasting blood. Pride won't keep your kid breathing. Someone murmured agreement. Vivienne's eyes flicked once to the battered toolbox by his boot, then returned to his face. Cool, measuring. He was Elias Ward, but in this building he was mostly a badge and a uniform. Calm, unshakable, he stood where power never looked, in a room designed to make men like him swallow their own worth. He nudged the envelope another inch away, refusing to let money speak for him. In his jacket pocket, an inhaler pressed against his ribs. In his wallet, a clinic receipt folded until the paper went soft. At home, his 9-year-old son fought asthma that didn't care who owned the building. Every shift mattered, and still he wouldn't let dignity be something rented by the hour. Ronan snapped his fingers toward the door. Back to your tunnels, then. Vivian finally spoke, smooth as sealed glass. Leave him. Lessons stick better when they hurt. Elias turned without a word. His boots made one blunt sound on polished flooring before the elevator swallowed him. As he descended, the air warmed, the hum deepened, and the world became real again. The service corridor greeted him with buzzing fluorescents and sweating pipes. Heat rolled off metal. Somewhere a compressor coughed. Somewhere else, a conveyor clattered like teeth. Down here, nobody wore perfume. They wore work. A young tech, Jessamora, matched his stride. You really said no? It wasn't a tip, he said. It was a leash. Jessa's eyes darted toward the elevator doors. They don't like being told no. They'll live, he said, though he wasn't sure he would. Line 7 waited behind a safety fence. The morning's VIP tour had nearly collapsed when the stabilizer valve stuttered. One ugly shiver that makes investors nervous. He'd felt it through the floor before the alarms even chirped. Palm on a vibrating panel, ear catching the faint rasp of a bearing starving for oil. He'd fixed it fast. Not for applause. For the people working beside it. Now the line ran smooth. Lights steady. He checked the gauge, felt the controlled heat, and his mind flashed, unwanted, to a different kind of heat. Sun on steel, field generators whining, the math of load and failure where a bad call meant bodies. He shoved the memory down. That life was buried. His phone buzzed once. A text from the clinic, Milo wheezing again. His throat tightened. He stepped into an alcove where the wall dulled the noise and called back. The nurse's voice softened, practiced kindness. He's stable, but his refill didn't clear. There's still a balance. I paid, he said, too quickly. I know, she replied. The system says otherwise. I'm sorry. He stared at the concrete until the gray seemed to tilt. A balance, like breathing could be paused for billing. He forced his voice level. Keep him calm. I'll come after shift. He keeps asking when you're home, she said. I'm trying, he whispered and ended the call. When he stepped back out, a supervisor approached, tablet tucked to his chest, hands too clean for this corridor. Ward, your schedule is changing. Effective immediately. Elias didn't blink. Changing how? Cutting hours, the man said, eyes fixed on the screen. Budget realignment. Also, you're removed from VIP response. That roster is why the line didn't fail today. The supervisor's mouth twitched. Orders from upstairs. The punishment landed quietly, more vicious than laughter. Elias nodded once, because rage cost energy he needed for his son. "Send it to me. It's already in the system," the supervisor said, and walked away. Jessa hovered, fists curled. They're doing this because of the tip. Elias didn't answer. He opened his toolbox on a nearby cart and began reordering his tools with deliberate care. Wrench aligned, screwdriver nested, meter wrapped, rag folded. His hands didn't shake, but his chest did, tight with anger and fear. He imagined Milo's small wheeze, and kept ordering steel like prayer against the day ahead. Above them, behind glass, money decided who mattered. He shut the toolbox with a soft click, and the sound felt like a lock turning. He shut the toolbox with a soft click, and the sound felt like a lock turning. Jessa watched him like he'd just done something reckless. "They cut your hours, didn't they?" He slid the cart toward the next inspection point. "Looks that way." "That's not realignment," she muttered. "That's retaliation." He didn't deny it. The corridor vibrated beneath their boots as Line 7 powered up for the afternoon cycle. Heat shimmered above the ducts. Somewhere deeper in the plant, turbines spun with a steady, predatory whine. Work didn't care about pride. Work only cared about whether the system held. A shadow stretched across the grated floor. Ronan Price stepped through the security gate, suit crisp against the grease-streaked backdrop. He didn't belong in the labor zone, and he wore that fact like armor. "Ward," he called, voice carrying over machinery. "You've made an impression upstairs." Elias kept tightening a bolt. Wasn't trying to. Ronan clasped his hands behind his back. "You embarrassed the CEO." "I returned her envelope." "You refused generosity," Ronan corrected. Investors noticed. "They're asking questions about morale." Elias straightened slowly. "Morale's fine down here." Ronan's smile thinned. "Not for you. Effective tomorrow, you're reassigned to auxiliary maintenance. Night shifts. Lower visibility." The word settled like dust after a collapse. Night shifts meant fewer hours with Milo. Fewer clinic calls answered in real time. More distance between father and son. Jessa stepped forward before she could stop herself. "He's the only one who caught the valve stutter this morning. You know that." Ronan's gaze flicked to her badge. "And you are?" "Jessa Mora. Systems tech." "Careful, Miss Mora," he said softly. "Loyalty is admirable. Misplaced loyalty is expensive." He turned back to Elias. "You could have taken the money. Nobody would have blamed you. A man in your position should know when to nod and smile." A muscle jumped in Elias's jaw. "My position?" "Maintenance," Ronan replied, gesturing around them. "Replaceable." The word echoed longer than the machinery. Ronan leaned closer. "You've got a kid, right? Medical issues?" His voice dropped. "You can't afford theatrics." For a second, Elias's vision narrowed to a tunnel of sound, the churn of belts, the metallic tang in the air, the pulse in his ears. He forced himself to breathe evenly. "My son isn't a bargaining chip." "No," Ronan said. "He's leverage." Silence stretched. Even the machines seemed to hesitate. Ronan adjusted his cufflinks. "Take the reassignment. Keep your head down. And next time someone offers you $5,000 for a simple fix, take it." He walked away without waiting for an answer. Jessa exhaled shakily. "He had no right bringing up your kid." Elias wiped his hands on a rag. "Upstairs always thinks they have rights. You're not replaceable," she said quietly. Not after what I've seen. He glanced at her. What have you seen? You read systems like they're alive, she said. That's not maintenance. That's something else. He didn't respond. Years ago, in another uniform, he'd been trained to hear instability before it screamed, to feel failure before it snapped. That training had saved lives. It had also taken pieces of him he never got back. A warning light blinked amber on a distant panel. Minor fluctuation. Most wouldn't notice. He did. He moved toward it, checking readings. The numbers steadied under his touch, but something felt off, like a rhythm slightly out of sync. He filed it away in his mind. Jessa leaned against the rail. You know, people watching this story unfold should probably stick around, she said with a faint, ironic smile. Moments like this don't stay buried. He gave her a sideways look. She shrugged. If anyone's listening out there, subscribe and keep watching. Something tells me this isn't ending the way they expect. He almost laughed, despite himself. You always narrate your own life? Only when it feels historic. Historic? He doubted that. To him, it felt like survival. His phone buzzed again. A photo this time, Milo in a hospital chair, giving a thumbs up, oxygen tube looped around small ears. The caption read, "Breathing better." "Don't worry, Dad." Elias stared at the image until the corridor blurred. The boy's smile was crooked, stubborn. Just like his. "I can't lose this job," he murmured. "You won't," Jessa said. He wasn't so sure. Power upstairs had long memories and fragile egos. He challenged both. Overhead, a faint vibration rippled through the catwalk, stronger than before. He looked up instinctively. "Did you feel that?" he asked. Jessa frowned. "Probably load balancing." "Probably," he echoed, though his instincts disagreed. Across the factory floor, behind reinforced glass, he could see the executive observation deck suspended like a throne. Figures moved behind it, silhouettes in tailored suits. One of them paused. Even from this distance, he could feel Vivian Kessler watching. Not with anger, with curiosity. And that unsettled him more than any punishment. Behind the glass, Vivian didn't move for several seconds. The factory lights reflected off the observation deck, turning her into a silhouette cut from shadow and silver. Then she turned away, disappearing into the executive corridor. The vibration under Elias's boots returned, faint, irregular, not enough to trip a system alert, not enough for anyone upstairs to care, but enough. He crouched beside the panel Jessa had recalibrated earlier and pressed his palm against the casing. Warm, stable. Yet the hum inside carried a tremor, like a held breath. "You're hearing something again," she said quietly. "Yeah. Software says it's within tolerance. Software doesn't feel metal stretch." She studied him a moment. "You ever think about going back?" "Back where?" "To whatever you were before this." He tightened the last bolt and stood. "That's over. Doesn't look over when you're working," she muttered. He didn't answer. Instead, he logged the minor anomaly in the maintenance system. Brief, factual, unlikely to trigger action. Then he pushed the cart toward Auxiliary Bay, already thinking ahead to the night shift he'd been handed like a warning. The elevator ride up to clock out felt longer than usual. Polished walls reflected his grease-streaked shirt. His reflection looked smaller under executive lighting. In the lobby, marble floors muted his steps. A fountain whispered in the corner, ornamental and useless. A receptionist glanced at him, then quickly away. Ronan stood near the exit, speaking into a headset. He paused when he saw Elias approaching. "Night shift starts tomorrow," Ronan said, lowering the device. "Badge access updates at midnight, I saw. You'll report to Auxiliary. No more VIP response, understood." Ronan studied him, searching for cracks. You could still fix this. There's nothing to fix. There always is, Ronan replied. An apology. A thank you call. Pride's expensive. So is oxygen, Elias said before he could stop himself. Ronan's eyes sharpened. Careful. Elias stepped past him into the late afternoon glare. Outside, the parking lot baked under sun. Executive vehicles gleamed in reserved rows. Bentleys, electric hypercars, matte black SUVs. At the far edge near a chain-link fence, his old pickup waited, paint dulled by years and weather. He climbed inside and let the engine idle. The cab smelled faintly of metal and pine air freshener. He rested his forehead against the steering wheel for a second, just one, before starting the drive to the clinic. Traffic crawled. Billboards advertised luxury condos powered by clean energy, Kessler Energy's newest campaign. His grip tightened. At the clinic, fluorescent lights hummed like tired insects. Milo sat upright now, oxygen removed, inhaler on the tray beside him. The boy grinned when he saw his father. "Hey," Milo said. "I told them you'd come." Elias crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled him into a careful hug. The kid felt light, too light. "How's the breathing?" "Better," Milo replied. "Nurse said I was brave. You are." Milo leaned back. "Did the rich lady give you money?" The question landed harder than Ronan's threats. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you said sometimes people try to pay instead of say thanks." He forced a smile. She tried. "And I said no." Milo considered that seriously. "Why?" "Because we don't take money for doing what's right." The boy nodded slowly. "Okay." But his small hand tightened around Elias's sleeve. "Are we okay?" He knelt so their eyes were level. "We're okay." It wasn't a lie. Not yet. At the billing desk, the clerk avoided his gaze. "There's still a discrepancy in the system. We're working on it." "I paid," he said evenly. "I know. It just hasn't cleared. Another system glitch. Another imbalance." On the drive home, Milo dozed in the passenger seat, sunlight striping his face. Elias glanced at him at every stoplight. At their apartment, the evening air carried the smell of distant rain. Inside, the place was modest but clean. A framed photo hung above the couch. Elias in a different uniform years ago. Younger, shoulders squared under desert sky. He'd almost taken it down after the war. Milo insisted it stay. Dinner was simple: soup, bread, medication lined neatly on the counter. They ate at the small kitchen table. "You tired?" Milo asked. "Little." "Don't be," the boy said. "You fix everything." Elias smiled faintly. "Not everything." Later, after Milo slept, he sat alone with the clinic receipts spread before him. Numbers glared up like accusations. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Yeah?" Silence for a beat. Then a woman's voice, smooth and controlled. "You hear instability before others do," Vivian Kessler said. "Why?" He sat very still. "That's not a question a CEO asks maintenance," he replied. "No," she agreed. "It's not." He waited. "The demonstration is in 3 days," she continued. "If you're wrong about what you felt, nothing happens. If you're right, a pause. I want to know before anyone else does." "And why would I tell you?" "Because," she said softly, "your son's clinic called my office today. The air in the room shifted." "What did you do?" he asked, voice low. "Nothing," she answered. Yet the line clicked dead. The line clicked dead. For a moment, he didn't move. The apartment felt smaller, the air thicker. The hum of the refrigerator seemed too loud. Milo shifted in his bedroom down the hall, a soft cough breaking the silence like glass. Elias lowered the phone slowly and stared at the dark screen. She called the clinic. Not to help, to prove she could. Anger rose, sharp and clean, but beneath it sat something colder. Calculation. Vivienne Kessler hadn't threatened him outright. She'd simply demonstrated reach, influence, access, power. He stood and walked to Milo's doorway. The boy slept on his side, inhaler within arm's reach, one hand curled under his cheek. His breathing was steady now, fragile but steady. "We're okay," Elias had promised. He stepped back into the kitchen and opened his laptop. Maintenance logs loaded slowly over the apartment's weak connection. He pulled up the anomaly readings from line 7 and cross-referenced them with stabilization protocols for the new autonomous system scheduled for demonstration. The numbers didn't lie. Load fluctuations were minor on the surface. But the architecture beneath, physical conduits, heat dispersal channels, manual bypass valves, was built on assumptions. Assumptions that software would always compensate fast enough. He'd seen that kind of confidence before. In another life, another uniform, a generator system had been designed with similar faith. Digital controls had failed during a sandstorm. Heat spiked, metal warped. A chain reaction nearly tore through a forward operating base. He'd stopped it by ripping the system off automatic and forcing manual reroutes no algorithm anticipated. The memory pressed against him now. At the plant, Vivienne's engineers trusted code. He trusted steel. He pulled up the demonstration schematic released internally for VIP review. There it was, an override protocol embedded deep in the stabilization hierarchy. Untested in live stress conditions, he leaned back, jaw tightening. She'd asked why he heard instability before others. Because he'd buried friends under systems that were supposed to be safe. Because he knew what cascading failure sounded like before alarms screamed. His phone buzzed again. "A message from Jessa, you good?" He typed back, "Did you log the microspike on Bay 3? A moment passed, then, yeah. They flagged it as normal variants. He stared at the screen. Normal variants. 3 days until demonstration. He called her. She answered on the second ring. "You okay?" "No." A pause. "What happened?" "She called me who?" "You know who. Silence on the line. That's not good," Jessa said carefully. She mentioned the clinic. "That's a line," she breathed. Yeah, he paced the small kitchen, careful not to wake Milo. "The system's wrong," he said. "It's not just a glitch. You think it'll fail. I think it'll cascade if pushed hard enough, and they're pushing it hard for the demo," she replied. "Yes." Another pause. He could hear machinery faintly in the background. She was still on shift. "Why tell me?" she asked quietly. "Because you're the only one down there who listens." She let out a shaky laugh. "That's terrifying." He stopped pacing. "If I'm right, this isn't about embarrassment anymore. It's about containment," she finished. "Yes." The word hung heavy between them. "You going to tell her?" Jessa asked. "She doesn't want truth," he said. "She wants leverage. And what do you want?" He looked toward Milo's room again. Stability. Jessa exhaled slowly. "If something happens during that demo, it'll be public," he said. "Investors, press. And if it fails in front of them, they won't be able to hide it." Silence again. "You're thinking about letting it fail," she realized. "No," he said firmly. "I'm thinking about being ready when it does." That difference mattered. He ended the call and closed the laptop. Sleep didn't come easily. Morning arrived gray and heavy. At the plant, banners had been raised across the exterior. Clean energy slogans, sleek logos, promises of revolution. The demonstration hall buzzed with preparation. Catering crews moved through marble corridors. Security checkpoints doubled. He reported for his final day on visible shift before reassignment. The factory floor vibrated stronger than yesterday. He felt it before he heard it. At Bay 3, the stabilization unit pulsed faintly off rhythm. Jessa met him near the railing. Loads climbing faster than scheduled. Why? Pressure test for the demo. They're simulating peak demand. He inhaled slowly. The amber light flickered again. Above them, through reinforced glass, silhouettes gathered on the observation deck. Vivienne stood at the center, watching. He placed his palm against the casing once more. The metal felt warmer than it should. 3 days, Jessa whispered. Not even, he replied. Because whatever was coming, it had already started. Because whatever was coming, it had already started. The casing beneath his palm pulsed once, subtle but wrong. Not the steady hum of calibrated output. This was uneven, searching. Jessa glanced toward the observation deck. They increased load again. I know. He pulled his hand back and crouched, unsnapping the latches on his battered toolbox. The hinges squeaked softly, steel against steel. Familiar. Grounding. Inside, everything sat exactly where he'd left it. Wrenches aligned. Voltage meter wrapped in cloth. Spare fuses tucked in the corner. Except something new rested on top. A folded sheet of heavy ivory paper. He froze. That yours? Jessa asked. No. He lifted it carefully. The paper smelled faintly of perfume. Subtle. Expensive. On the front, written in precise ink. For the mechanic who hears what others don't. His jaw tightened. He unfolded it. Inside was a handwritten schematic fragment. Small. Almost casual. A notation referencing the override cascade protocol buried deep within the autonomous system hierarchy. Beside it, a single line, if you're as capable as you think you are, you'll understand. Jessa leaned closer. That's from upstairs. Yes. She left it? Has to be. The notation wasn't part of standard maintenance access. It was executive-level architecture. Information he shouldn't have. He scanned it once more. And his blood ran cold. They built a dependency loop, he murmured. What? The override draws thermal load into a secondary chamber without adjusting physical dispersal rate. It assumes software compensates instantly. And if it doesn't? The heat stacks. How bad? He looked at the core housing across the bay, imagining the stress lines forming beneath polished surfaces. Bad enough. Above them, applause drifted faintly from the demo rehearsal. Jessa swallowed. Why would she give you that? Because she thinks this is a game. He folded the paper slowly and slid it back into the toolbox. The gesture felt symbolic. A weapon placed among tools. Listen, Jessa said quietly. If you're right about this, people need to see what's happening. He closed the lid halfway, thinking. Public. It would have to be public. The demonstration wasn't just a launch, it was a spectacle. Investors, journalists, city officials. If failure occurred in that arena, denial would evaporate. But letting it spiral unchecked would risk lives. He wouldn't do that. I'm not here to prove her wrong, he said. I'm here to keep this place from blowing. Jessa nodded, eyes steady. Then we prepare. He rose and scanned the surrounding infrastructure. Manual bypass valves along the lower conduit. Access hatch beneath the grated platform. Secondary coolant routing behind the containment wall. If cascade starts, he said, voice low, software will freeze trying to compensate. We'd have about 90 seconds before chamber pressure spikes. 90? She repeated. If we're lucky, Her breath hitched. He crouched again and adjusted his meter, calibrating it for higher thermal sensitivity. I need eyes on auxiliary coolant lines. Can you reroute camera feeds during demo? I can try, she said. Don't try, he corrected gently. Do. A faint smile touched her lips despite the tension. Got it. He straightened and glanced once more at the observation deck. Vivienne stood there, posture immaculate. From this distance she looked composed, untouchable. But she'd planted this note. Why? To test him? To bait him? To see whether he'd rise or crumble? The heat shimmered stronger now. A low vibration rolled through the floor, subtle but building. You feel that? Jessa asked. Yes, he shut the toolbox firmly this time, sliding the note beneath his voltage meter. The click echoed louder in his ears. If you've ever watched someone underestimate quiet skill, you already know what's coming. Stay with this story. Because the exact moment when Steele answers arrogance is closer than anyone upstairs realizes. He grabbed the cart handle and moved toward the lower access hatch. Ward. A supervisor barked from across the bay. That area's restricted during demo prep. Then maybe you should ask why it's overheating, he replied without slowing. The supervisor hesitated. Because even he could feel it now. The hum wasn't steady anymore. It was rising. The hum wasn't steady anymore. It climbed in pitch, a thin metallic whine threading through the heavier churn of turbines. Workers nearby slowed, glancing at panels that still glowed green. No alarms. No flashing red. But the floor vibrated sharper now, like tension pulled tight. The supervisor who'd shouted earlier hovered near the railing. Control says everything's stable. Elias didn't look up from the lower conduit hatch he'd knelt beside. Control's reading software. And this is steel. He pried open the hatch. A rush of hotter air brushed his face, dry and metallic. The secondary coolant pipe along the interior wall shimmered faintly, too warm for the load it was supposedly carrying. Jessa leaned over his shoulder. Thermal index just ticked up 2 points. Without demand change? Yeah. He exhaled slowly. Above them, the observation deck filled with more silhouettes. The rehearsal applause had turned into measured commentary. He could almost hear the words. Innovation, precision, future. Future didn't hum like this. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown number again. He stood and answered without greeting. You're down there, Vivienne's voice said calmly. Yes. Is it as dramatic as you think? He glanced at the pipe, at the shimmer that wasn't supposed to exist. It's warmer than it should be. A brief pause. Engineers confirm all systems nominal. Engineers aren't touching it. You're implying negligence? I'm stating physics. Silence crackled through the line, then a faint exhale. If this fails during the demonstration, she said, the loss will be substantial. You built redundancy, he replied. We built innovation. That's not the same. Her tone cooled. If you're wrong, you've wasted my time. If I'm right, he countered, you'll waste more than that. The line went quiet for a long second. Show me, she said finally. He stared at the phone. Show you what? Convince me. The call ended. Jessa's eyes were wide. She's actually listening? She's evaluating risk, he said. That's not the same. No, it wasn't. He crouched again, running his hand along the pipe. Heat pressed against his skin harder now. If the override cascade engages under full demo load, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else, thermal expansion won't match the software model. Jessa pulled up diagnostics on her tablet. Primary chamber still within threshold. Primary isn't the problem. He stood and motioned toward the narrow service stairwell. I need to check auxiliary. Ward. The supervisor called again, more nervous now. "You can't just—" "I can," Elias interrupted calmly. "Because if this spikes, it won't ask permission." He climbed the graded stairs 2 at a time, boots ringing against metal. The higher he went, the louder the hum became. Less vibration now, more strain. Halfway up, he paused. A faint crackling noise threaded through the machinery. Not electrical. Thermal. He'd heard that sound before, metal flexing microscopically under pressure. At the top landing, a maintenance panel guarded the secondary dispersal chamber. He pulled it open. Hot air rushed out in a sharp breath. Jessa reached him seconds later. Temperature just jumped another 3. Without load increase, he finished. Her face drained of color. Below, workers began murmuring. Something had shifted. The rhythm was off enough now that even untrained ears caught it. Across the bay, a door on the observation deck opened. Vivienne stepped onto the interior balcony alone. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She simply watched him. He met her gaze through layers of glass and heat shimmer. This was the test. Not of machinery. Of him. He pulled his voltage meter from his pocket and pressed it to the chamber housing. The reading blinked higher than projected variance. He held it up so she could see. Even from this distance, he saw her posture stiffen. Jessa swallowed. That's outside margin, yes. If Cascade triggers, it will. When? He listened again. The crackling grew sharper. Soon, a shrill chirp cut through the air. First minor alarm. One panel on the main floor flickered from green to amber. Then, another. Up on the deck, executives leaned forward. Ronan stepped beside Vivienne, speaking urgently. The second alarm sounded, louder. Now workers were backing away from line 7 instinctively. Jessa's voice shook. They're increasing software compensation, which will draw more load into the override, Elias said. And stack more heat, yes. The third alarm triggered. Red this time. The hum became a roar. Somewhere below, a conduit clanged violently as metal shifted. He looked once more toward the observation deck. Vivienne wasn't speaking now. She was watching him. Waiting. He felt it clearly then. This wasn't humiliation anymore. This was exposure. If the system failed in front of investors, there would be no spin. No narrative control. And if he fixed it in front of them, the thought settled into place. Public. It would all happen in public. Jessa grabbed his arm. What do we do? He reached for his toolbox, which he'd dragged up the stairwell behind him. We don't let it blow, he said evenly. Below them, the containment chamber emitted a sharp metallic crack that echoed like a gunshot. Below them, the containment chamber emitted a sharp metallic crack that echoed like a gunshot. Workers scattered from the immediate perimeter. Someone shouted for emergency protocol. The alarms shifted from warning to sustained alert, a high, relentless tone that vibrated through bone. On the observation deck, movement exploded, executives scrambling, security pressing hands to earpieces. Ronan barked orders that dissolved in the roar. Elias dropped to one knee beside his toolbox. Cascades engaged, Jessa shouted over the noise. Software's trying to compensate, that's the problem, he replied. Heat radiated through the grated floor, rising in waves that blurred vision. The air smelled sharp now, metallic, almost sweet like overheated circuitry and stressed alloy. Primary chambers peaking. She yelled, glancing at her tablet. They're overriding manually from control. They'll make it worse. He flipped open the toolbox. Steel gleamed under red emergency lighting. Wrenches. Insulated gloves. Manual valve key. And beneath the voltage meter, the folded ivory note. For the mechanic who hears what others don't, his jaw tightened. Poetic. He grabbed the insulated gloves and shoved them on. You get me visual on auxiliary coolant. Already rerouting cameras, she said, fingers flying across her tablet screen. Another metallic bang shook the structure. A seam along the containment housing split slightly, a thin line glowing faintly. That's expansion, he said. Pressure's climbing. On the observation deck, Vivienne stepped forward to the glass. Her face was no longer composed. It was calculating. He met her eyes again. Then he turned away. He descended the narrow stairwell 2 steps at a time, toolbox clanging against metal. Each step carried him closer to the core access bay, a zone restricted to top-tier engineers during live operations. Security guards blocked the lower gate. "You can't go in there," one shouted. "If I don't," Elias snapped, "you won't have a building left to guard." The guard hesitated. Another crack thundered through the chamber. A jet of superheated vapor hissed from a stressed seam. The guard stepped aside. Inside the restricted bay, the noise was deafening. Heat pressed against his face like an open furnace. Red emergency lights strobed across polished steel. Control room voices blared over speakers. Override failing. Compensation loop unstable. He set the toolbox down near the manual bypass valve. Jessa's voice crackled through his phone speaker. "Auxiliary coolant lines are lagging by 4 seconds. "That's enough," he muttered. He jammed the manual valve key into place and turned. It resisted. "Come on," he growled. He leaned his weight into it. The valve shifted half an inch. On the observation deck above, cameras swung toward the chaos. Journalists pressed against glass recording. Investors stared. Public. Exactly what power hated most. Pressure just spiked again. Jessa yelled. He wrenched harder. Muscles burned. Sweat stung his eyes. The valve gave another fraction. A spray of scalding steam burst from a seam, hissing inches from his shoulder. He didn't flinch. Manual reroute engaged at 20%. He shouted. Control room voices faltered. "Who authorized?" "Doesn't matter." Someone else barked. He rotated the valve further. The hum shifted pitch, lower, strained, but no longer climbing. Temperature stabilizing slightly. Jessa cried. Not enough. He scanned the chamber housing. The secondary dispersal pipe, the one he'd checked earlier, glowed faintly orange now. "That's the choke point," he said. "You can't reach that without shutting primary feed. Watch me." He grabbed a wrench and moved along the narrow maintenance ledge, boots slipping slightly on condensation. Heat blistered through the gloves. Above him, the observation deck filled the upper field of his vision. Faces pressed to glass, eyes wide. Vivienne stood at the center. She wasn't looking at the gauges. She was watching him. He reached the auxiliary choke valve and braced himself, pressure holding at critical threshold. Jessa shouted. "If it spikes again—" "It won't," he said, though certainty cost him. He forced the wrench onto the valve head and turned. The metal screamed. He turned harder. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, the roar softened. Not quiet, but softer. Red lights flickered back to amber along one panel. Control room chatter shifted tone from panic to confusion. "Manual reroute stabilizing," someone said. "Who initiated that?" Elias didn't answer. He kept turning until the valve locked into new alignment. The chamber's glow dimmed from orange to dull red. Heat receded incrementally. The hum settled into something resembling control. Behind the glass, applause didn't come. Silence did. He lowered the wrench slowly and stepped back, chest heaving. The alarms downgraded from sustained to intermittent warning. Jessa's voice trembled with adrenaline. "You did it." "No," he said quietly, glancing up at the deck. "They're watching. Because the real shift wasn't just thermal, it was social. The mechanic they'd dismissed had just taken command of their innovation in front of everyone who mattered. And every camera in that hall was still recording. Steam thinned into wisps. The roar settled into a strained but manageable hum. Red lights across the containment wall flickered back to amber, then to cautious green. The emergency tone cut off mid-wail, leaving a hollow ringing in the ears of everyone inside the bay. Elias kept his hand on the wrench a moment longer, feeling the metal cool beneath his palm. Above him, the observation deck doors burst open. Executives spilled into the stairwell, security trailing close. Investors hovered near the glass, whispering urgently. Cameras tracked every movement below. Vivienne descended halfway down the metal steps and stopped. She didn't rush the floor. She assessed it. Ronan arrived behind her, breathless. "Control regained stability," he announced, though his voice lacked authority now. Elias removed his gloves slowly and stepped back from the valve. "You bypassed central authorization," Ronan snapped from the stairs. "You had no clearance." "And you had no containment," Elias replied evenly. The words echoed through the bay. A few workers nearby exchanged glances. They'd heard it. Everyone had. Vivienne descended the rest of the stairs alone. Heat still radiated faintly from the core housing, warming the air between them. She stopped an arm's length away. "Explain," she said. He pointed toward the dispersal pipe. "Your override cascade assumes thermal compensation matches digital speed. It doesn't. Metal expands slower than code predicts. Our engineers ran simulations. You didn't run live stress with physical lag." Ronan stepped forward. "This is absurd. The system was stabilizing before. It wasn't." Jessa's voice cut in as she approached, tablet clutched tight. Temperature delta exceeded projected tolerance by 7% before manual reroute. All eyes shifted to her. Vivienne extended her hand. "May I?" Jessa hesitated, then handed over the tablet. Silence fell as Vivienne scanned the data. Around them, cameras zoomed in. Journalists whispered into microphones. A low murmur rolled through the hall like distant thunder. This wasn't hidden. This was witnessed. Vivienne looked up slowly. "You predicted this," she said. "Yes." "And chose not to report it formally." "I did," he replied. It was flagged as normal variance. Ronan's face tightened. Vivienne turned to him. "Is that accurate?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. The readings were within software margin, but not physical margin. She finished. A ripple of murmurs passed through the investors. Public exposure. Elias bent to retrieve his toolbox, lifting it by the worn handle. The ivory note slipped partially free. Vivienne noticed. Her eyes flicked to it. "Open it," she said. He met her gaze. "You already know what's in it. Open it." He set the toolbox down and unfolded the paper carefully. The handwritten schematic fragment caught the overhead light. Gasps murmured from nearby executives. Ronan frowned. "What is that?" "Executive override architecture," Jessa whispered. Vivienne's voice was calm, but tighter now. "I left that in your toolbox." "Yes." "Why?" Ronan demanded, staring at her. She didn't answer him. Instead, she addressed Elias. "You understood it. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't accessible," she corrected. The air between them shifted again. She turned slowly toward the observation deck and the cameras still trained on the scene. "Ladies and gentlemen," she called up, voice carrying clearly despite the residual hum, "you've just witnessed a stress failure that our automated systems failed to compensate for." Murmurs intensified, but, she continued, You also witnessed manual intervention preventing structural compromise. All eyes returned to the man in grease-streaked clothes holding a wrench. Ronan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're handing him credibility." She didn't look at him. "He earned it," she replied. Elias felt the weight of dozens of gazes pressing against him. Heat still radiated from the chamber, but this warmth was different. Social, volatile. Vivienne stepped nearer, lowering her tone just enough for him to hear. "You could have let it fail. Yes. And you didn't." "No. Why?" He glanced briefly at the cameras, because people were standing inside it. Her gaze sharpened. Not profit. People. Jessa exhaled softly beside him. Vivienne straightened. "Effective immediately," she said loudly, addressing both floor and deck. "The autonomous stabilization rollout is paused pending physical architecture review." Investors exchanged uneasy looks. "And," she added, eyes returning to Elias, "manual protocol review will be led by someone who understands both digital models and physical stress." Ronan stiffened. "You can't be serious." She didn't break eye contact. "Watch me." A beat of stunned silence followed. If you've ever waited for arrogance to meet consequence, this is that moment. Stay with this story, because the next decision reshapes everything you thought power meant. She turned to the press. "Prepare a statement." Behind her composed posture, something had shifted. Respect. Not purchased. Proven, and the mechanic who refused her tip now stood at the center of her innovation, holding the only tool that had saved it. And the mechanic who refused her tip now stood at the center of her innovation, holding the only tool that had saved it. The containment chamber continued to cool in slow, audible ticks. Metal contracting. Pressure normalizing. The air still shimmered faintly with residual heat, but the danger had passed. Investors began whispering in tighter clusters. Journalists spoke urgently into cameras, narrating what they'd just witnessed. Workers on the factory floor stared at Elias like they were seeing him for the first time. Ronan stepped forward, jaw rigid. "This is premature," he insisted quietly to Vivienne. "We can frame this as a successful stress test." She didn't look at him. "It wasn't scheduled as a stress test," she replied. "And we don't frame physics." His lips pressed thin. Elias wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve. His hands were steady now, though adrenaline still hummed beneath his skin. Jessa leaned close. "You realize this just changed the hierarchy." He glanced toward the observation deck where executives still stood frozen in evaluation. "Hierarchy doesn't like change," he said. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." Security began ushering non-essential personnel away from the core bay. The press remained behind glass, lenses zoomed in tight. Vivienne turned back to Elias. "You said you reported the variants," she stated. "Yes." "To whom?" He looked past her at Ronan. Silence thickened. Ronan stepped forward defensively. It was within margin. "Software tolerance." Software tolerance nearly tore through containment, she cut in. "It didn't," Ronan countered quickly, "because the system compensated." "No," Elias said. Calmly. "Because I did." The words landed heavier than the earlier crack in steel. A few workers near the railing murmured approval. Ronan's composure frayed. "You overstepped authority, and you underestimated consequence," Elias replied. The tension between them felt physical. Vivienne studied both men carefully. "Ronan," she said at last, "why was manual architecture review not conducted alongside automation?" He hesitated. "That would have delayed rollout." "At what cost?" She pressed. He had no answer. Silence expanded outward, carrying through the chamber and up to the observation deck. Investors shifted uneasily. Public exposure wasn't subtle, it was surgical. Elias bent to close his toolbox, sliding the ivory note back beneath the meter. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone watching. The very object they'd mocked, his worn, oil-streaked case, had become the fulcrum of stability. Vivienne noticed again. "You refused my tip," she said quietly enough that only he and Jessa heard. "Yes. Why?" He looked directly at her. "Because respect isn't something you hand out in envelopes." For the first time since descending the stairs, she allowed the faintest flicker of something human to surface. Recognition. Ronan inhaled sharply. "We don't have time for philosophical debates. Investors are watching," she interrupted. He fell silent. She turned toward the glass wall separating them from the press and investors. "You've just seen a system vulnerability," she said clearly. "You've also seen the individual who prevented its escalation." Cameras zoomed tighter. "This company claims to value innovation. Innovation without humility becomes arrogance. Today we were reminded of that." A ripple of reaction moved through the crowd. Ronan's face drained. Vivienne faced him fully now. "Effective immediately," she said, voice firm. "You are suspended pending internal review." The words detonated more quietly than the alarms had, but with deeper impact. Gasps sounded across the deck. "That's outrageous," Ronan snapped. "You're choosing a mechanic over." "I'm choosing competence over ego," she replied. Security approached him. For a second, he looked like he might argue further. Then he saw the cameras. Public. He straightened stiffly and allowed himself to be escorted toward the stairwell. The factory floor fell into stunned silence. Elias hadn't moved. He hadn't asked for this. He'd only prevented collapse. Vivienne turned back to him. "You'll join the review panel," she said. He blinked once. "That wasn't the deal. There was no deal. I work maintenance. You understand the system better than those who designed it," she replied. He considered that. Jessa nudged him lightly. "Take it." He looked toward the cooling chamber, then toward the observation deck where investors were still watching. "This isn't about promotion," he said carefully. "I know," she answered. "Then it's about fixing it." "Yes." A beat of quiet understanding passed between them. The balance had shifted, not through revenge, through visibility. He lifted his toolbox again. The hum of machinery returned to its steady rhythm. But nothing about the building felt the same. Above them, banners promising clean energy still hung pristine and bright. Below them, Steele had just rewritten who mattered. The factory floor remained quiet long after Ronan disappeared up the stairwell. Workers stood in loose clusters, murmuring in low tones. The air still carried warmth from the chamber, a reminder of how close it had come. Vivienne motioned toward a side corridor. "Walk with me." He hesitated only a second before following. Jessa gave him a quick nod, equal parts pride and disbelief. The corridor they entered was one he'd rarely used. Carpeted, soundproofed, designed to insulate decision-makers from the industrial heartbeat below. The contrast felt deliberate. Inside a glass-walled conference room overlooking the plant, executives waited stiffly. Some avoided his gaze. Others studied him with thinly veiled skepticism. Vivienne remained standing. "Before we proceed," she said, "I want clarity. Ward, explain the failure path." He set his toolbox down at the end of the polished table. No one offered him a seat. He didn't ask for one. "The override cascade pulls excess thermal load into a secondary chamber," he began evenly. "Your model assumes instantaneous digital compensation, but physical systems lag." An older engineer frowned. Our simulations accounted for latency. Digital latency, he replied. Not structural. Murmurs circled the table. He moved to the glass wall and pointed down toward the containment housing below. When load increased for demonstration pressure, the override engaged earlier than designed. Heat stacked faster than dispersal channels could adjust. That's why the seam expanded. Another executive leaned forward. But the system recovered. No, he corrected. It stalled. Silence. Vivienne folded her arms, and if manual reroute hadn't occurred, he met her gaze directly. You'd have lost the chamber. How severe? Worst case? Structural rupture. Best case? Public shutdown. The weight of that settled visibly across the room. One board member cleared his throat. Can it be corrected? Yes, all eyes turned back to him. But not by patching code, he continued. You need physical redundancy added to the dispersal channels. And a manual override that isn't buried beneath 5 authorization layers. An uncomfortable shift rippled through the table. That undermines automation credibility. Someone muttered, "It protects it," he said calmly. Vivienne watched him closely. Not as a challenge now, but as assessment. "Draw it," she said. He blinked once. "Draw what?" "The redundancy you're proposing." He hesitated only briefly before pulling a folded maintenance schematic from his toolbox and spreading it across the table. With a pen borrowed from the nearest executive, he sketched quick, precise lines, rerouted coolant loops, staggered thermal buffers, accessible manual bypass points. His hand didn't shake. When he finished, he stepped back. The room studied the drawing in silence. One of the engineers finally spoke. This would have absorbed the spike. "Yes. And you saw this from floor-level diagnostics?" "And experience," he replied. Vivienne tilted her head slightly. "Experience where?" A pause. He considered deflecting. Instead, he said combat engineering. Structural stabilization under live load. The room shifted again. That missing piece clicked into place for them. Not just a mechanic, a man who'd managed systems where failure meant lives. Vivienne nodded slowly. "You buried that," she said. "It wasn't relevant," he replied. "It was," she corrected. "We just didn't look." The honesty in her voice landed heavier than accusation would have. One board member exhaled sharply. "We need a statement before markets react." "You'll have one," she said without looking away from Elias. She stepped closer to the table, examining his sketch. "Implement this," she instructed the engineering team. "Immediately?" someone asked. "Immediately." "And the rollout?" another pressed. "Delayed," she replied. "We don't release unstable systems." No one argued this time. Public exposure had already done its work. The board members began filing out to manage investors and press communications. Soon, the room was nearly empty. Only Vivienne and Elias remained. She studied the drawing again. "You could have let it fail," she said quietly. He didn't answer. "You would have been vindicated either way." "I'm not interested in vindication," he replied. "Then what?" He glanced out at the factory floor, at workers resuming cautious tasks. "Stability." She nodded once. "I misjudged you, yes." The directness startled even her. "I thought refusal was ego," she continued. "It wasn't." "No," she admitted. "It was boundary." Silence settled between them. "You'll head the physical review division," she said at last. "I didn't ask for a promotion." "I'm not offering charity," she replied evenly. "I'm correcting hierarchy." He considered that. "And my schedule?" he asked quietly. She held his gaze. "Family first," she said. "Always." He searched her expression for leverage, for calculation. He found none. Outside the glass, workers looked up occasionally, aware something irreversible had happened. Steel had spoken, and for once, power had listened. Steel had spoken, and for once, power had listened. The conference room door slid shut behind the last board member, leaving only the faint hum of climate control and the distant rhythm of machinery below. Through the glass wall, the factory floor moved carefully, almost reverently, as if the building itself understood it had survived something significant. Vivienne remained by the table, fingertips resting lightly against the schematic he'd drawn. "You're not celebrating," she observed. "There's nothing to celebrate," he replied. "You nearly lost containment, and you prevented that." He closed his toolbox with a deliberate click. "That's my job." "No," she said softly. It wasn't. He looked at her then, not as an employee, as an equal measuring weight. She walked to the glass and looked down at the chamber that had glowed orange less than an hour ago. "I built this company on acceleration," she said. "Speed, dominance, being first." "And you were," he said. "Yes." She folded her arms loosely. "But speed without friction burns." The admission carried no theatrics, just recognition. He adjusted the handle of his toolbox. "Friction keeps things grounded." She glanced at him. "You really wouldn't have taken the money." "No." "Even knowing your son's clinic balance?" His jaw tightened briefly. "Especially knowing." That answer lingered between them. Outside, a group of engineers began inspecting the modified dispersal channels under new instructions. Jessa stood among them, already relaying measurements with sharper confidence than before. Vivienne turned back to the table and picked up the ivory note. She studied her own handwriting for a moment. "I left this because I thought you needed proving," she said. He didn't respond. "I thought pride would make you reckless." It didn't. "No," she agreed. "It made you disciplined." She folded the note once, then placed it carefully back into his toolbox. "It belongs with the tools that saved us," she said. He watched the gesture without comment. A knock sounded at the door. A communications director stepped in cautiously. "Press is requesting a statement." "Markets dipped briefly but are stabilizing after the pause announcement." Vivienne nodded. "Tell them the review is underway and that safety protocols are being expanded." The director hesitated. "And about him?" She glanced at Elias. "He'll be introduced formally tomorrow," she said. "As head of physical systems oversight." The director blinked. Understood. When the door closed again, silence returned. He shifted his weight slightly. "You didn't have to suspend Ronan publicly." "Yes," she replied. "I did. He'll blame me. He already did." A faint humor ghosted across her face. "This wasn't about punishment," she continued. "It was about correction." He considered that carefully. On the factory floor, a few workers looked up toward the glass again. Word traveled quickly in buildings like this. Respect traveled slower, but it traveled. "You'll have resistance," he said. "I expect it." "From the board." "From myself," she added quietly. He nodded once. Honesty wasn't common currency in executive corridors. She moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing," she said. He waited. "I contacted the clinic to verify information, not to threaten." His gaze sharpened. "I don't use children as leverage," she continued. "But I needed to understand what you were protecting. And now I do." Silence. "Your son's balance has been corrected," she added. His expression hardened instantly. "I didn't ask." "It wasn't charity," she interrupted firmly. "It was reimbursement for hazard exposure today. Company policy." He held her stare. After a long second, he exhaled slowly. "Next time," he said, "ask." A small nod. "Next time," she agreed. They stepped out of the conference room together. Below, Jessa caught his eye and gave a subtle thumbs up. Workers straightened as he passed, not dramatically but with a shift in posture that signaled awareness. He hadn't demanded respect. He demonstrated it. The containment chamber now hummed steadily, its surface cooling under revised flow patterns. The building felt different, less fragile, less blind. Vivienne stopped at the threshold separating carpet from steel. "You were right about one thing," she said. "What's that?" "Respect isn't handed out in envelopes." He lifted his toolbox slightly. "No," he replied. "It's earned where it counts." She nodded once, then turned back toward the executive wing. He walked down toward the factory floor. And this time, no one called him replaceable. And this time, no one called him replaceable. The factory floor carried a different rhythm now. Not louder, not softer, just steadier. Workers nodded as he passed. Some gave small, wordless acknowledgments. No applause, no theatrics. Just recognition earned the hard way. Jessa caught up beside him near the dispersal unit. "They're already implementing your buffer design," she said, almost breathless. Board signed off. He glanced at the reinforced channels now being measured for expansion. "Good. You realize what happened, right?" she asked. "System failure," he replied dryly. She shook her head. "Power failure." He didn't argue. Across the bay, a maintenance tech who'd once avoided eye contact now stepped forward. "Hey," the man said awkwardly. "Nice catch." "Nice teamwork," Elias corrected. The tech nodded, reassured by the deflection. Because that's how respect stabilizes. It spreads. Later that evening, he stood in the small clinic hallway, fluorescent lights humming overhead. The billing clerk looked up from her computer and offered a tentative smile. "Your account's clear," she said. "I'll review the invoice," he replied evenly. She nodded quickly. Inside the room, Milo sat upright on the bed, inhaler resting loosely in his hand. "Dad," he said, grinning. "You're late. Work ran long. Did you fix it?" He paused. "Yeah," he said softly. "I fixed it." The boy's eyes lit up. "Told you." He sat beside the bed and brushed a hand through Milo's hair. The steady rise and fall of his son's chest felt like the only metric that mattered. "You okay?" Milo asked. "Yeah, good," the boy replied. "Because when people don't listen, you make them." Elias almost laughed, something like that. Back at the plant the next morning, press cameras lined the perimeter of the demonstration hall. Investors returned cautiously, watching from behind glass. The revised dispersal system gleamed with additional reinforcement, physical evidence of humility added to innovation. Vivienne stood at the podium this time. "Yesterday," she began, voice clear across the hall, "we were reminded that automation does not replace experience. It requires it." She stepped aside. He didn't like podiums. He preferred steel. But he walked forward anyway. "This system works," he said simply. "Now it works safely. No buzzwords. No performance. Just fact." Cameras flashed. He stepped down quickly once finished, retreating toward the factory side rather than the executive wing. Because that's where he belonged. Where power never looks. Later, alone in the service corridor, he opened his toolbox again. The ivory note rested neatly beneath the voltage meter. He unfolded it once more, for the mechanic who hears what others don't. He took a pen from his pocket and added one line beneath her handwriting, for the leader who finally listened. Then he folded it carefully and returned it to its place. Steel ticked softly around him as systems stabilized into their new configuration. Hierarchy had shifted, not through destruction, but through correction. Vivienne passed by the corridor entrance and paused briefly. "They're calling this a turning point," she said. "It should be," he replied. "For the company, for the people in it." She gave a small nod and continued on. He closed the toolbox and lifted it easily. Outside the plant, morning light reflected off reinforced glass and polished steel. Executive vehicles lined one side of the lot. His old pickup waited at the far edge near the fence. He chose it without hesitation. Because dignity doesn't need luxury to prove its weight. Before you go, ask me for the next story title, subscribe, and don't miss our next story, Single Dad Mocked by CEO at Airport. The boarding announcement changed everything. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?
You can't stand here.
The security chief said sharply. This gate isn't for people like you. The single dad froze when the metal barrier stayed locked and the guards stared past him. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. He didn't raise his voice or argue, even when they threatened to escort him away. None of them knew the system was already listening. They stopped the single dad at the mansion gate like he was trespassing. Security waved him back, judged his boots, and treated his daughter like a mistake to escort away. But the single dad didn't argue. He calmly asked to check one thing on the keypad. What happened next made the guards freeze, and the whole driveway went quiet. Because this wasn't really about a gate, it was about who gets believed. Before I show you the exact moment when one sentence from his daughter triggered a system-wide lock and exposed the truth, he lowered his hand from the keypad and stepped back, as if he'd touched nothing at all. Calm, still, unshaken. The kind of stillness that didn't come from weakness, but from someone used to rooms where mistakes cost lives. His shoulders stayed relaxed, boots planted on the gravel drive, eyes scanning without being obvious. This place wasn't just stone and iron to him. It was the finish line of years spent rebuilding after loss. A promise he'd made quietly to a child who trusted him without question. Every locked bar and polished camera was supposed to mean safety for her. Being denied entry wasn't just embarrassing. It felt like someone trying to erase the proof that the promise mattered. The woman in charge of security, Alara Ketterly, adjusted her earpiece and watched him with narrowed eyes. She saw a man out of place, a laborer lingering too close to privilege. Around them, engines idled, soft music drifted from inside the estate, and arriving guests slowed, curiosity flickering as they took in the scene. He felt his daughter's fingers curl tighter around his own. Not scared, confused, that hurt more. He squeezed back once, grounding them both. The iron gate hummed faintly, a sound most people ignored, but his attention caught on it immediately. The pitch was wrong, too tight, like a system holding its breath. Alara's voice cut through the air again, crisp and practiced, reminding everyone who held authority here. She ordered checks, repeated protocols, made it clear this wasn't a misunderstanding but a decision. Each word landed heavier than the last, stacking judgment on top of judgment. He didn't respond. Instead, his gaze drifted to the control housing near the gate, to the subtle wear along its edge. Years ago, he'd learned how systems aged, how stress left fingerprints if you knew where to look. This one was under strain already, not broken, waiting. A few onlookers shifted uncomfortably. Someone whispered that the man seemed too calm. Another muttered that the child shouldn't be standing there. Alara mistook the murmurs for support and straightened, doubling down. The rules were the rules. Appearances mattered. Order had to be maintained. He finally spoke softly, asking a question no one expected. Not permission, not a plea, a clarification about the gate's status. The guard nearest the panel scoffed, but Alara hesitated, just a fraction too long. That hesitation was enough. The hum deepened. A light on the panel blinked once, then steadied. He stepped back again, hands visible, non-threatening, as if to say he'd done nothing at all. His daughter looked up at him, searching his face, and he gave her a small nod. Inside the estate, something shifted. Not yet obvious. Just a subtle rebalancing, like weight moving across a bridge. Alara felt it before she understood it, irritation tightening her jaw as she demanded reports. He waited. Patience had always been part of the job. Back when he'd learned that the loudest person in the room was rarely the one in control. The driveway seemed to narrow, attention funneling toward the quiet man and the child beside him. This was only the beginning. The gate remained closed, but the system was awake now. And soon, everyone watching would learn exactly who had built the rules they were so eager to enforce. The gate stayed closed, but the silence around it thickened, as if the estate itself were listening now. Alara lifted her wrist and spoke sharply into her mic, demanding a status check. Her confidence just slightly overplayed. No alarms sounded, no lights flashed, yet something unseen had shifted, and that uncertainty irritated her more than open defiance ever could. She stepped closer, heels crunching on gravel, eyes sweeping over the man again, his jacket worn at the cuffs, his posture too composed for someone supposedly caught trespassing. "Sir," she said, slower this time, "you're interfering with a restricted access point. I'm going to need you to step away from the gate with your child." He didn't move. He simply looked at her, expression unreadable, as though measuring not her authority, but her understanding. The driveway felt smaller, watched. Guests arriving for the evening event lingered instead of passing through, curiosity outweighing etiquette. A couple of phones came out, half hidden, recording without commitment. Behind Alara, one of the guards muttered that the panel wasn't responding the way it should. She shot him a warning look, then turned back, voice firming. She cited protocols, liability, safety concerns. Each word was a brick in a wall she believed would hold. She didn't notice how the man's eyes flicked briefly toward the housing unit again, then away, like someone checking a pulse. His daughter shifted beside him, sneakers scuffing the stones. He crouched slightly so she could hear him, murmuring reassurance, a promise that they'd go inside soon. That promise wasn't bravado, it was certainty. She nodded, trusting him in the simple, absolute way only children could. Alara exhaled through her nose and signaled to two guards to flank the gate. "Escort them back to the service lane," she ordered. "We'll verify identity once they're clear of the entrance." That was when the panel chimed softly. Not an alarm, just a single, polite tone. The guards froze. Ilara's head snapped toward the sound, irritation flashing into suspicion. She demanded a readout. The response came delayed, fragmented, as if the system were sorting through something it hadn't expected to find. A few feet away, a maintenance worker assigned to the event frowned at his tablet. He glanced from the screen to the man at the gate, then back again. "That's odd," he murmured, he not meaning to be heard. The woman in charge stiffened. "What's odd?" she demanded. "Access logic just looped," he said carefully, like it's cross-checking an internal reference. Ilara's jaw tightened. She turned back toward the man, suspicion sharpening. "What did you touch?" "Nothing I wasn't supposed to," he replied evenly. The answer unsettled her more than denial would have. Around them, murmurs grew louder. Someone whispered that security looked rattled. Another remarked on how calm the man was. The class divide, once clean and invisible, started to fray at the edges. If you're still with me, subscribe with the bell on, because this moment is where everything quietly starts turning. Ilara made a decision. She ordered a full credentials sweep, intent on burying whatever anomaly had appeared under layers of procedure. And the irony didn't occur to her, that procedures were exactly where the problem lived. Guards moved, radios crackled, and the gate remained stubbornly closed, neither denying nor granting entry. The man straightened to his full height, eyes following the activity without interference. Years ago, he'd learned that systems under stress revealed themselves not through noise, but through hesitation. This one hesitated again, lights dimming almost imperceptibly before stabilizing. He felt it like pressure behind the eyes, a familiar warning. His daughter tugged his sleeve and pointed toward the gate, whispering a question only he could hear. He nodded once, lips pressing into a thin line. Not yet. Ilara's voice rose as she received incomplete reports. Her authority, so solid minutes ago, now required repetition to maintain. Guests shifted, impatience mixing with intrigue. The estate, meant to showcase control and luxury, had become a stage for uncertainty. He waited, patience stretching the moment thin. Every second brought more witnesses, more eyes on the imbalance playing out in plain view. The woman in charge didn't realize it yet, but by keeping him there, by insisting on her version of order, she was doing exactly what the system demanded. The gate hummed again, deeper this time, as if acknowledging something it recognized. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Ilara looked unsure. Ilara's uncertainty hardened into irritation, and irritation quickly became resolve. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and chose authority the way some people chose armor. "Lock this down," she said into her mic. "No entries, no exits, until I get a clean verification." The words rippled outward. Guards shifted positions, forming a loose perimeter that subtly pushed the onlookers back while still keeping the man and his daughter squarely in view. The driveway no longer felt like a passage. It felt like a checkpoint. Engines idled, their low vibrations threading into the air, while the distant music from inside the estate continued, oblivious. He felt the change immediately. Not fear, exactly, but pressure. The kind that came when a system was forced into a posture it wasn't designed to hold for long. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself, and glanced down at the girl beside him. She looked up, brows knit,